I think it's a pretty good budget actually, considering the government's deficit at the moment. We expected one or two fairly draconian taxes being introduced there, but it really didn't happen. In fact, it was a very good budget for business generally, and particularly small businesses, which remain the lifeblood of the economy in this country. In terms of corporation tax, the rates that corporation tax payable for larger companies is actually going to reduce to 26% in this year ahead, with a commitment to reduce to 23% over the next 4 years. Now, although that affects companies that are making only £1.5 million a year profit or more, that still will have a knock-on effect for businesses across the region, because obviously there'll be more distributable profits there'll be more investment available to those sort of companies who can reinvest their profits. In terms of the smaller companies, 21% is the current rate of corporation tax, and that's going to reduce to 20%. So that's a welcome reduction there as well. It's also worth remembering that of all the G7 nations, the UK corporation tax now, in among that group of nations, is actually at the lowest among them. So that's encouraging. One of the most encouraging parts of the budget was actually the extension of entrepreneurs' relief from £5 million per individual to £10 million with effect from the new tax year. That's very encouraging. That allows anyone who's selling their shares or selling their business to pay only 10% capital gains tax on the first £10 million of any capital gains, and that's quite a substantial increase when you bear in mind a year or two ago that actually was only £1 million, so it went up from 1 to 5 to now 10, and that's per party in a husband and wife share ownership scenario. So we would actually encourage people to take a good look at their shareholdings and consider some restructuring. Speak to us about that, because there's some things we could be doing to really maximise this very valuable long-term relief for you. In terms of the assistance that the legislation gives to small businesses, one area that we picked up on was the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which has been extended so that people now, if they invest in a small business, buy shares in that small business and keep them for the longer term, they can actually get tax relief of 30% of the money they put into that company now. So, for example, if you put £500,000 in a small business and invested it in a qualifying business, you would get £150,000 off your tax bill in that year of making the investment. Now, that's quite a concession, bearing in mind it was 20% before, and also it was on a much smaller amount. So that's something that small business owners there really ought to consider. Another area that the government has announced in the budget was that they're actually getting the banks, or agreed with the banks, to increase their lending targets for the year ahead by a further 15%. Now, obviously, a lot of small businesses have had problems borrowing money in the last few years. Understandable when the current economy and the liquidity or lack of liquidity with banks. So that's a good sign if the government can get them to do that. From our experience, we've found that over the last few years, we've done pretty well in terms of getting funding agreements through and monies raised for clients and companies that we act for. And I think in many ways that's because of the strength of the relationships that we've got with those banks and the credibility of the cash flow forecasts and business plans that we prepared for those clients. So if you are having trouble in those areas, please do consider giving us a call. In terms of income tax and personal tax, the personal allowance threshold has been raised to 7,475, so that's gone up by £1,000 for this tax year ahead. And there's also an undertaking to increase that to £10,000 a year over the next 2 to 3 years. So that will take a lot of people outside of the income tax net. And I guess really it's also a reflection of the fact that the government deemed the cost of actually collecting that tax prohibitive, bearing in mind that for someone earning £10,000, they'd only be probably sort of £250 worth of tax they'd be paying anyway. So that's a positive move again. That will save on red tape. That will save, certainly it will help with part-time employees and people like that. But don't forget, of course, it's not all good news there, because the 50% tax rate is still in, and that's not going to be abolished for the foreseeable future. That's not something the government are planning to do. So, we do have generally a higher income tax regime in force now at the top end. Something we also noticed from the budget that we think will have a really positive impact on SMEs was with regard to tax relief on research and development. Currently you can get tax relief of 175% on research and development. That's going to increase to 200%, which basically means whatever you spent out, you get double the tax relief on it back, which is very valuable. And we also find that so many clients just think that research and development tax relief is only available on sort of scientific businesses and biosciences, pharmaceutical companies, and that's not the case. It's much widely available than you think, perhaps, and we've been successful in getting R&D tax credit claims with companies in the print industry, media, IT, software, that sort of stuff. So do consider that in terms of your new product development and research in areas that, if you're not sure as to whether an item of expenditure might qualify for R&D tax credits, give us a call, we'll look up and we'll find out for you. An area of potential relief to employers, which was announced in the budget, was the fact that the government said that they're going to review the no-win, no-fee legal position with lawyers who get employees to make unfair dismissal claims after they've left companies, and generally sort of exploit the fact that the legislation in this country, employment legislation, is very geared towards the employee. So that really could help, because we know for a fact that a number of our clients have had problems in this area, so the sooner that comes, the better. An area that looks very good from a sort of commercial viewpoint for clients of ours, and that the government is emphasising, is on the whole environmental green industry. The formation of the Green Bank now that the government's announced is going to come in 2012, slightly earlier than expected, and there'll be some fantastic incentives, we believe, for companies that are active in those areas. A lot of people just assume that environmental stuff is outside the scope of their sort of business areas, but we've seen clients that have done very well in those sectors in recent years, in areas like insulation, or in one case there was an industrial cooling system installer who's done very well because they're energy efficient units that they're installing, and so there's a number of opportunities there that when this Green Bank legislation comes into force, we do believe a number of our clients would be really considering getting into those sectors from a commercial point of view. A number of industries were highlighted in the budget speech as to being very important to the UK economy. Areas such as life sciences, technology, specialist manufacturing, those sort of areas, and I think those sort of businesses sectors are going to get special help and encouragement over the next few years from the government, which is welcome news. The other area that I think that's quite relevant to certainly the Essex and South East is construction and property, which has perhaps been the doldrums for the last couple of years. And there's a new initiative that was announced yesterday to help first-time buyers get on the property ladder. A £250 million investment is to be made there, which is a sort of shared equity ownership scheme, which the government believe will put around 10,000 people or families back onto the property ladder, and that will be a welcome boost if that works there. So that's an area that we're keen to look at a bit more closely in the weeks and months ahead. Furthermore, on the property side, the changes that were announced yesterday also, it's likely that planning restrictions will be lifted to a large extent, so the default setting where the development is of a sustainable nature is to allow that development unless you hear otherwise. So there's going to be fundamental changes there that we see that could have a positive impact on the construction sector. Staying on construction also, with regard to capital allowances, there were some relaxations there in the capital allowance legislation for what we call short life assets. A short life asset previously was an asset that you believed would last 4 years or less. That's been increased to 8 years, so there's an awful lot more assets now that would fall within that criteria and will get the special sort of capital allowance treatment. So we think that could be very valuable to a lot of companies. In terms of capital allowances also, I would emphasise the fact that a number of people have land and buildings, construction, commercial properties, and they may not have realised that within those properties there's an integral features within them that would be defined as plant and equipment, and special tax relief is available in that plant and equipment. Very often as much as 25% of a building's cost element is plant and equipment, where there are capital allowances available. We've undertaken a number of capital allowance reviews for clients in recent years, and that's resulted in some big tax reliefs and reductions in their corporation tax bills, in some cases refunds. So we would ask you to consider that important area, and it is an area that we're going to be looking at much more closely going forward. Bearing in mind also with residential properties that are available for letting and meet certain legislation and criteria, there's some big tax reliefs available there now, so do ask us about those. To sum up, some really good positive help there in the budget for small businesses. One thing that George Osborne said towards the end, summing up, which struck me as very important, he said that he wants Britain to be the best place in Europe to start up and grow a business. That matches in very well with the philosophy that we have at CBHC, where a number of our clients in the last couple of years, under difficult market conditions, have actually done pretty well. It's been a tough time, and let's hope that recovery is not too far away now. There's a number of opportunities from a sort of commercial point of view that come out from that budget, not just the tax opportunities. So I would emphasise that you have a good look at those and do speak to us about them, because as well as producing the accounts, tax and audit work for our clients, we do a lot more than that. There's a lot of areas that we could help you that you perhaps hadn't thought of before, so do get in touch.